I would like to take our discussion a step further with port address translation. Our example so far limited our use to a single IP address for port address translation, and that was the IP address associated with the outside interface. But what if I want to perform PAT and use a pool of public IP addresses? If you look at our example, we do have 12 public IP addresses that can be utilized. We had 16 in total. One's being used on our outside interface, one's being used on the ISP's interface, and then 2 others, well, it's the network ID and the broadcast ID, that we cannot use, leaving us with 12. But right now, we're just using this outside interface. So what are we doing with the other 12? Well, we might use some of them from static translations for servers that we have in our organization, maybe a web server, maybe an FTP server. But what if we have like 5,000 users or 8,000 users? Is it really possible for all 8,000 users to piggyback on this one single public IP address? That's possible. I'm not saying you can't do it. But what are some of the limitations we might run into? Well, the biggest that comes to mind is port numbers. We only have a finite number of port numbers, 65,535. That's it. Some of them are reserved. Some of them are well known. We're not going to use those. Right? Our clients choose port numbers when they communicate from the ephemeral port range, in the upper range of the port numbers. And so that doesn't leave our devices a whole lot of port numbers to choose from. And what could potentially happen is that our router gets to the point whereby it really has no more unique port numbers that can be utilized for translation purposes. Let's say 2 PCs are using the exact same port number. What is a router going to do if 2 PCs are using the exact same port number for their communication process? Well, when it does the translation, it will randomly choose another port number that's currently not being used for translations to make sure that no mistake happens during the translation process when traffic returns. Right? It's keeping everything unique in that network address translation table. But if you have like 8,000 users, it's quite possible that we're going to run out of port numbers on the router if everybody's accessing the internet at the same time and they are accessing multiple sites at the exact same time. And this could occur with just 1,000 users where you run out of port numbers depending on the load that the users put. Meaning, how many different sites, how many different connections are they making to the internet at all the exact same time? So how can we utilize PAT but with a pool of addresses? Let's go back to a dynamic NAT example that we have, whereby we have an access list defined for those inside addresses. We have a NAT pool defined for the public IP addresses. We have our outside interface. We have our inside interface. And then we have our IPNAT inside source command. The inside source says, use this private IP address range and translate it to this public IP address range. Everything's great so far, but we are limited to just these 6 addresses within the pool. It's a one-to-one relationship. How do we turn on PAT? Very, very easy. We are now going to use PAT on the pool of addresses. Let me repeat that. We're going to use port address translation on the pool of addresses now. So we have these 6 addresses within the pool, but now we can use all 6 addresses and use port address translation on top of that, giving us a larger number of users that could access the internet all at the exact same time using multiple connections, multiple web browsers instances, multiple email instances, whatever it may be, using an excessive number of port numbers on us. Why? Because we can utilize these 6 addresses combined with the port numbers, just giving us a wider range to work with. So this is more of a real-world example here, whereby we're going to utilize that pool of public addresses and attach PAT to it, port address translation.